Scott Lucas, thank you for your time. Let's talk about these missile strikes that have hit the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. How brazen were they?
Oh, how far do you want to go on the scale of brazen? Russia has done this before. Alongside the Assad regime in Syria, while there was a UN peacekeeping mission in that country during its conflict, they kept attacking while the mission was trying to operate, eventually confining that mission to its hotel in Damascus. But this time it was the head of the UN, the Secretary General, who was meeting President Zelensky, a high-profile talk about the humanitarian situation, about the military situation, and Russia then lobs 5 cruise missiles into Kyiv within hours of their joint press conference. Now, there were specific targets that were hit. There was a factory that makes anti-aircraft missiles that was hit. But of course, they also hit this residential building, this high-rise, setting it on fire, which really shows that the Russians, they don't care if civilians are affected, and they don't care if the UN's trying to intervene, because remember, the day before Guterres met Zelensky, he met Vladimir Putin in Moscow, where Putin repeatedly lied about Russian military operations.
No one was killed in these impacts, as far as we can tell, so far in Kyiv. But the political impact and repercussions, what do you make of it?
Well, just an update. We now are hearing that there are 2 civilian fatalities. There's one in the residential building, according to Vladimir Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, and there was a Ukrainian journalist who worked for Radio Liberty who was killed near the anti-aircraft factory. But in terms of the wider question, which is Russia will continue as it struggles on the ground with its offensives to try to disrupt the ability for Ukraine to move its own forces. That's why it hits railway stations. That's why it hits these production factories that make military equipment. At the same time, however, Russia is trying to do 2 other things. They're trying to intimidate the international community, don't provide military aid, don't provide economic aid to Kyiv, and perhaps most importantly, they're trying to terrorize the civilians in Ukraine, trying to break their will to support the resistance.
Let's talk about Antonio Guterres. He's been vocal. He's met with Vladimir Putin and now Volodymyr Zelensky, but he's also criticised the UN Security Council for failing in this regard. Why did he do that, and will that have any longer-term impact?
Well, I mean, it's a statement of fact. The fact is that the Security Council did not do anything to be able to check this invasion by Vladimir Putin, and that the UN has largely been sidelined with the pretense by Russia that it's negotiating when it has no intention to do so. But there's an implicit message by what Guterres said. The Security Council is paralyzed because of a Russian veto. The Russians weren't going to allow the Security Council to do anything, which points to a longer-term issue for the UN. How can it operate if one of its permanent members on the Security Council is the aggressor in a conflict? But I think there's a wider message beyond this, which is, all right, if we cannot operate to keep the Russians from invading, how can we highlight the humanitarian issue? And not only how can we highlight the humanitarian issue, if Russia continues to attack, can we highlight the killing of civilians? Because the UN will be involved with other agencies in investigating the war crimes by Russian troops during and after this conflict.
Do you have any information about any new operations to evacuate civilians, particularly in the east and south? Do we know what's happening on the ground now?
Well, on the specific with Mariupol, which I'm sure your viewers have been following for more than 2 months as it's besieged, we still have up to 1,000 civilians in the steelworks where the Ukrainian defenders are set up. And the Russians will put out their propaganda, oh, the civilians can leave, they can leave. Putin told Guterres that earlier this week. They can't leave. It's effectively a surrender or die situation, and there's no way to get to those people. You cannot break the Russian hold on the area. In the east, the hope is to evacuate as many residents as possible because of the Russian ground offensive, but the Russians have been blocking the evacuations either by shelling in the areas they control or by attacking railway stations in the Ukrainian-controlled areas, including a couple weeks ago, where they killed at least 57 people in one assault.
We've spoken a little bit about Vladimir Putin and Russia being on the UN Security Council. The other key member, although they're all key members, but the US, and the US isn't budging either from its support of Ukraine. President Joe Biden providing $33 billion for support. What do you make of that? Is that enough in any way?
Look, the fact is, how much is enough when Russia is committed to this assault? But what we can say is that the international aid, not just the US, not just UK or Europe, countries like Australia, has helped Ukraine push Russia out of northern Ukraine. Now we're in the phase of the assault on the east and the south of the country. And what we're seeing from the international community, not only with military aid, economic aid, and humanitarian aid, is they're going to keep escalating. Germany, for the first time, considering sending heavy armor to Ukraine. Japan, sending medicine and humanitarian supplies. Australia, sending armored vehicles as well. In other words, this is not just a US versus Russia fight, as Moscow wants to portray it. The international community has said Ukraine has prevented itself from falling in the opening weeks of this war. Now we're ready for the long haul.
Scott Lucas, thank you so much for your time, your analysis, and your insights.
Thank you, Isk.